afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. As always, on the fourth Wednesday of the month, I'm joined by Mark LaBarr, conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont. Great to have you here.
Always great to be here.
Looks like we're going to start off with catching up with some viewer mail.
Yeah, and Judy, I try, on shows to get some viewer mail in each time, but sometimes I get talking a little bit too much, so it's nice to kind of dedicate a show to just to some of the stuff that folks have been sending in. I try to answer folks as they come in over time, but we'll highlight some of them today.
Okay, well, let's start with this one from Elaine Thomas. It's pretty straightforward. She says, is this an American redstart? And
the answer to that is pretty straightforward, which is no. This is a young cedar waxwing. And we know cedar waxwings, they're flying around now. They're eating a lot of berries, a lot of honeysuckle. They have kind of a twittering sound. And this is a very young one that's probably moving around. The last time I ran our banding station, we caught a whole bunch of them. They're late nesters, so they tend to show up this time of year. A redstart, which is a warbler, would be quite a bit smaller than that. But, a nice start, a good,
good picture.
Good picture, nice starting point.
All right. You're coming up with a question here?
I think this is...
Here's a letter and a picture sent from Margaret Gannon of Plattsburgh. Hi, Mark. I was so surprised to see this bird on my kayak paddle the other day. I've never seen one around here. I'm glad that you were able to identify it for me. I spotted this bird in the marshy area near the Treadwell Bay Marina. It's part of Treadwell Bay near our home on Cumberland Head. Yeah,
so this bird is something that folks don't necessarily always see. We see a lot of great blue herons, and this is a black-crowned night heron. It's an immature black-crowned night heron. And she apologized for the picture being a little bit fuzzy, but that's all right. She's in a kayak,
she's a little busy.
You want to make sure you're not flipping that boat. You can see this bird has those heron features, the longer legs, that long bill, but because it's an immature, it has that brown streaking. An adult would look very different than that.
Yeah.
And these night herons, you can see that really big eye. They are often found feeding at dusk or feed at night, and hence their name.
Is that unusual?
No. I mean, they nest on a couple of the islands out on Lake Champlain. They're known to nest on the Four Brothers Islands. And we suspect there might be some smaller populations on some of the other islands. They're kind of a troublesome bird for me because they do come in and they like to eat common tern chicks. So they're one of the predators that eat the tern chicks that I study up on Lake Champlain.
Well, it sounds like there have been some sightings of some more unusual birds.
Yeah, we got a bunch of things that came in, calls and some pictures of a bird which people don't necessarily think of being in Vermont. This is a sandhill crane. Now, these are shots sent in by Richard St. Pierre. His sister took these up near the Cedar Swamp in Fairfield. And this is 2 adult birds and 1 juvenile. And I guess they've been watching these birds up there for a number of years, and this is the first time that they've seen that younger bird.
Look at that.
Yeah, here's a picture from Timothy Charbonneau. I guess there were a number of people that were stopping along the way and taking pictures. It's a striking bird. It's a big bird. It's out in a field, probably feeding on insects, frogs, and all of that kind of stuff. What's interesting about sandhill cranes is we've only had them maybe for the past decade or so. They tend to spend most of their time in the central flyway, migrating through the central part of the country, but they have expanded eastward. And folks see them in New York now and Maine and to the north, and there's some speculation that sandhill cranes may at one point in time have originally been here, and then as settlers came in, been pushed back, and now we're just seeing them kind of reemerge on the scene. But there's a couple places here in Vermont where they do nest and breed, usually in wet, marshy areas.
Well, it's great to see those pictures.
Yeah, and I guess there were, Richard said there were people pulled over on the side of the road, everybody taking pictures. So great to have something like that available for folks to see.
And this next one is even more unusual.
Yes, well, this is from a picture. This is Ralph Budd who sent this picture in. It was sent in by his wife, and this was at the bottom of their driveway over in Heinsberg. And it is a peacock.
Yeah, what's it doing there?
Well, that's what she was wondering, and we went back and forth in emails, and it turns out one of the neighbors has a peacock. This is a young male, and it escaped and was wandering around. We often see chukars and other game birds. You know, you hear about them escaping in Vermont. But to see a peacock like that, it hadn't developed its full tail. But we were able to solve that mystery. So you've got the sandhill crane, which is a new bird coming here, but native to North America. The peacock certainly is not.
Okay. Here's a question from Marilyn Wingersky about her bluebirds. She says, we have several bluebird houses. One's under a crabapple tree that the birds haven't used. This year there was activity around it for a while, then none for 6 weeks or so. I looked inside. There was a nest with 5 blue eggs, apparently abandoned. Then she said her other box was at the end of her blueberry patch. She went down 4 weeks ago to put some netting over the bushes. Since then, there's been some activity, but no evidence of feeding young. So she said she got brave and looked inside, and there were 4 eggs in the nest. And she said, since it only takes 3 weeks to hatch, is it possible that they were not viable? And is there a problem with bluebird eggs that don't hatch?
You know, bluebirds are interesting. And as you may know, you have bluebirds at your house. We have them here at the centers, at the, in Huntington as well. And sometimes you would think that a box is unoccupied, and then all of a sudden you find birds there. Sometimes you see a lot of activity around the different boxes. It's one of those things that unless you probably follow them on a regular daily basis, some of those mysteries are going to remain a mystery. In this case, I'm not exactly sure what happened, whether that first box was abandoned. You do see that. Sometimes one of the adults can be killed for whatever reason. And whether that second batch of birds were abandoned as well is kind of tough to say. But they can be kind of confusing, and it's one of those things that you want to take a peek in and keep an eye on them, but you also want to limit that disturbance. So some years you just have to kind of sit back and guess at what's happening in the bluebirds in your yard. At least they had them there. Right,
exactly. I mean, ours were very obvious to begin with, but then they kind of moved away, and I haven't seen them for a while, so I don't know what they're up to.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's, again, we find that same kind of thing at the Audubon. So you really have to be, kind of diligent and sitting there watching them all the time.
Here's a question and picture from Herb and June. These 2 birds got into our blueberry pen. They were clinging to the netting. Looked in a bird book, but wasn't sure if I could identify them. We have a variety of birds, but this one is new. We would appreciate your help. And by the way, we did let them out, and they apparently had found a hole in the netting.
Yeah, so I think his original question was whether this was a warbler, and this is actually an icterid, which would be an oriole.
Okay.
Okay, so it's in with blackbirds is a Baltimore oriole. It's a youngster. Or a female, and obviously the 2 of them, berries are a big part of birds' diets this time of year. They're beginning to move around, they're beginning to disperse, as we talked about. The cedar waxwings eat a lot of berries, catbirds. And so when you have your blueberry bushes, and I know this is at my house, we have a whole bunch of blueberries, those birds will go after those big fat berries. And if you do put fencing up like that, you just have to be careful. Birds will find a way to get in there, and you have to be diligent about letting them go, which these folks did. I remember one time we had friends that had a whole structure of netting around their blueberries, and 2 blue jays got in. They managed to clean the berries out before we released them, but it's just one of those things to be diligent, because you don't want to get a bird entangled in that stuff.
We had a problem with birds getting entangled in the netting, but before we could set them free, a hawk had found them.
Yes.
Which was not a very fun thing to have a front row seat on.
Right, and again, they get a little tangled, and if you do, obviously some birds this time of year are feeding on berries, and some birds are feeding on birds. Right, and so they'll take advantage of a bird that is in a place that is tough to escape from.
Okay, here's a question from Lynn Danforth. Dear Mark, I have had several birds at my feeder that apparently are ill. They're mostly brown with somewhat striped or speckled breasts anyway. They usually are all fluffed up, and they don't seem to hear or see very well. Sometimes they'll just be on the ground, and I can pretty much step on them. But she mentions that they're sitting at the edge of a bird bath or a feeder, and they're all fluffed up.
This is what they call house finch disease, or avian conjunctivitis, very similar to conjunctivitis you would have.
And you can see,
so this bird's eye, as you can see, has that conjunctivitis. For some birds, it's not a problem, but oftentimes what will happen is that conjunctivitis will swell to the point where the bird can no longer see. And once it can no longer see, it can't feed. And so that's when you start to find birds that are, just not moving around, or you actually find them at the bottom of your feeder. So again, a big thing there is to make sure, we talk about salmonella in the wintertime with a lot of bird feeders. You want to make sure your birds your feeders are clean. And if you have a situation like this and you see birds coming back, one of the suggestions is to take your feeders in, clean them, and then keep them out, down for a while. It probably was no fault to her that this bird had conjunctivitis, but it can.
Well, it's very contagious in people. Is it just as contagious with birds?
It can move between other birds. It seems to focus on the finches and sparrows, but it can be problematic, yeah.
Well, here's a similar question about hummingbirds. I have fed hummingbirds for years. This year I noticed a bird with a white fungus type area on its bill. I was wondering what causes this. I clean my feeders and change the sugar water every 2 days. There are many other hummers that come to the feeder and seem fine. Would this one be a bird? Would this be one bird, or is this something else going on?
And this is not that bird, but I looked it up. This is the first that I had heard, but I guess hummingbirds can get this fungal thing on their tongue, which actually causes their tongues to swell.
Ooh.
And can restrict them from being able to feed. And in the same way that the finches will die from not being able to see, the same thing happens with hummingbirds. I haven't come across it that much. This didn't seem like what he was describing. As I looked at it and researched it a little bit more, there were some comments about people, finding hummingbirds, and the hummingbirds would just get stuff stuck to the sticky parts of their bill from feeding on feeders. So whether this was a fungus or not, I'm not sure. It seems like it was only one bird, which is good, but again, keep your feeders clean. And it sounds like this person did actually
go. They had a really good schedule.
Yeah, to go. I mean, if you get out there every couple of days and you can change that water and you can keep that water clean, or the sugar water, then you're doing the best thing for the birds.
Okay, you have a couple of other pictures that folks have sent in?
Yeah, so these next couple of pictures are from one of the folks that I work with on the Velco power line, the Vermont Electric power line. We do surveys along that, and this is a blue-winged warbler, a picture of a blue-winged warbler that she sent in, which is one of the priority birds that we focus on down there.
Where in the picture is
I know, he's kind of tucked. He's right there in the middle. He's got that black eye line, and it's funny because nowadays, as things start to migrate and move, this is often what you see of these little birds flitting and moving really fast. This next one's a little bit easier, but what's interesting about the blue-winged warbler is it hybridizes with the golden-winged warbler, and it produces these hybrids. This bird that you see here singing has a little bit of both species in it, and so obviously they're on that section of right-of-way, which is a good section. She pulls in a lot of birds down there, has that hybridization going on. So a couple of nice images from Sue. And then I figured I'd finish the show with just a couple of shots my friend Jen Majessi had sent me. She was over in Wells, Maine, and this is a picture of a Bonaparte's gull. This is a small gull that we get on Lake Champlain, sometimes in great numbers, but a nice little end of the day shot. And then another gull picture. We don't talk about gulls too much, but sometimes, they're just nice birds to look at, especially when you're right down at the ocean. And what's interesting about this is a herring gull, and the coloration, when I looked at this in the lighting, made me think that it was potentially something else. And I don't know if you remember on the last show, we talked about David Sibley being here.
Yes.
And how one perceives different things. So, I went right for a lesser blackback gull, which it wasn't. And it was just a regular old herring gull. So there you have it.
There you go. You can even get stumped at times.
I get stumped a lot of times.
If you have a bird-related question and you'd like to write to Mark, you can reach him at Audubon, Vermont, 255 Sherman Hollow Road in Huntington. The zip code is 05462. You can also email Mark. His email address is mlabarr@audubon.org. Send Mark your questions, and he'll try to find the answers for you on an upcoming edition of Bird Notes. Great to see you.
Great to be back.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.